Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and today we're going to be talking about the spell Counterspell. Before we get into this, I want to brush up on the mechanics exactly. So, this is a reaction spell.
Yes.
Now, how does this work exactly? An NPC or monster or so the dungeon master says, and the goblin cast, do you have to stop him there? Or does he say, all right, the goblin cast fireballs, and he starts rolling dice, and you say, whoa, hold the phone, Kimosabi. I cast Counterspell. Is that how it works?
Okay. I believe rules as written, how everyone will have to play Dungeons and Dragons from now on is I begin casting a spell. You've already chosen the spell. Everyone else then has to go, I'm within 60 feet of them. Would I like to use my reaction that triggers here to cast Counterspell? Because how the spell works is you take the reaction, which is when a creature within 60 feet of you casts a spell. You have to see them. When you see a creature within 60 feet of you casting a spell. When that occurs, hypothetically, to my knowledge, you don't know what the spell is, just that they are casting it. No one in their right mind plays that way, because God doesn't grind things to a halt. Unless you're in the 4 members of your party have Counterspell and the 4 members of the enemy party have Counterspell, having to stop having the DM go, this creature starts casting a spell, would anyone like to cast Counterspell? Will grind an already grindy combat to a halt. Most people, the vast majority of tables that are using Counterspell, someone declares they're casting a spell as an action, they start to cast the spell, and someone else goes, wait, I Counterspell it. That's the more realistic use case for it, and that's how I'm going to be talking about the spell, because I think that is more applicable to the vast majority of people. Most people aren't going to be in the situations where they're doing the super tight, everyone's checking ranges, making sure counterspells in specific distances, and all that fun stuff. Now, you could hypothetically say, like, as the DM, you track when your person you know has counterspells within range of it, and just only announce it whenever you're doing that, and then you have to catch it over and over again, and then you're changing how you're running combat around the existence of a single 3rd level spell. And I find that annoying and frustrating. But overall, like, this is something you probably don't have to react that heavily to. That is going to be a powerful, neat thing that can
happen. Yeah, I would have liked to see play testing done after the creation of this spell, like how it was meant to be run. Because I don't think I've ever been at a table where the dungeon master says, all right, the goblin is casting a spell, pause. No, it's just, hey, guess what? Roll some saving throws because you're getting torched.
Mm-hmm. This very much fits into the rules intended kind of gameplay pattern, I think, for most things. It's kind of the rule of cool, if you will. It's something that a lot of more strategic-based board games, non-role-playing games, often will have moments in time where you could do things. So, for example, the game Magic the Gathering has a system called priority, which basically tells you when you can and cannot do things. Hypothetically, Dungeons and Dragons also has this priority. Hypothetically, there are specific moments in time where you can do specific things that is literally only gated by the sheer quantity of reactions that exist within the game that you could have access to that would allow you to react to them. So anytime someone would begin to do something that there's a reaction that exists that you could respond with, that is whenever you would be asked, do you want to respond to the thing with that reaction? Again, like a computer code going through a list of things to do it. Practically, no one wants to play that way. Practically, no one wants to go through the giant suite of checks and balances to when can I respond to things. The most common one is attacks of opportunity, and that is very often even like a little bit fudged and muddled with between like it's leaving your 5-foot range, you'd like to make an attack opportunity against it, or you remember, oh wait, I didn't make my attack opportunity, I'd like to do that in retrospect. And there's a lot of backtracking and a lot of jumbled rules. It's complicated, it's on the fly, it's messy. Don't expect this to be the I begin casting a spell, I counterspell it, because it's just not realistic.
Yeah, it seems like kind of an oversight on the creator's part, but all right,
yeah.
So in practicality, you're pretty much always going to know that if you're having something crappy cast at you, I'm not going to bother with my counterspell. But if you're getting fireballed, you will.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that was intended, but good for whoever's got the counterspell on them.
So here's the thing. If it isn't intended that way, Counterspell sucks. If it isn't intended to be that you know what you can counter, anything with Firebolt is going to make your life a living hell. It becomes basically a non-spell, right? Because you're gambling. whenever you cast.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? Whenever you see the 6 evenly cloaked creatures walk up to you, if you don't have the metagame knowledge of knowing what they're supposed to look like that have the higher level spellcasting, you have to decide which of their spellcasts is more valuable and which of them makes the counterspell worth casting. We're already talking about not the majority of encounters in this instance, right? Because the majority of encounters, from the player's perspective, aren't going to be using spells. The majority of encounters are using breath weapons, or using attack rolls, or using creature abilities that are agnostic of spells. There are some amount of creatures that use them. Those ones often aren't so meaningfully impactful that they're going to warp encounters around them. You're going to need counterspell for it. So like Dryads is an example. The Dryad spell suite, none of it you really need to counterspell, and it's a lot more honestly interesting of a counter if you don't. But for the few encounters where you do can't get counterspell and you are against the Archmage, knowing that you can lock down their specific spells is important. Now, alternatively, there's the DM usage of it, and this is the flip side of it. And this is where the spell gets very messy and very frustrating for lots of people. Counterspell as a DM tool so there's a whole little subgame around counterspell. I'll start with this. I think this is an important thing to briefly touch on. Spellcasting functions more or less unique to most other things in the game, in that the largest quantity of things are going to be able to do and use this shared pool and are interacted with by very few things. Counterspell is one of the very few ways a character can have to prevent a spell from occurring at all. If someone is casting Fireball, your options in that moment are to have been prepared and got resistance or immunity to it prior, or counterspell it. That's it. You then have some other niche mechanics around it, like Silence, that denies people's ability to cast spells in the first place. You have ways to mute people in that much. Grappling to restrain hands shuts off specifically somatic components. And you get this weird game that most people won't ever delve too deeply into, of how to mitigate people's ability to cast spells and how monsters and players are going to interact with that in a specific facet. This is where verbal, somatic, and material components become a lot more important. Having held items and knocking the orb out of the caster's hand denies them access to the material component, hypothetically. So you can do that as a sort of means of mitigating spell casting. But again, because of the way Dungeons & Dragons is played in the modern era, because most people don't want to really go through and think about all of these loops and jumps and hoops, this isn't realistically going to occur, especially whenever such a small pool of monsters have it. Now, vice versa, whenever the DM is using against the players, whenever you're looking at the DM shutting out player spellcasting out of nowhere, whenever the DM spontaneously starts disarming spellcasters and taking things off of their hands to muting them, doing all these other things, there can be a huge level of frustration that comes with that. If it's not two-wayed, if you're the only one suffering from the effects of denied spellcasting because you always have to cast spells, you're going to have a much worse time and have a lot more feel bads whenever your cool 7th level spell that you just got gets counterspelled and the other players in the party are still getting to do their cool things because they just literally don't interact on that axis. They literally don't have things that can be counterspelled. Whenever you go to cast the healing word to bring out the person on 2 death saves and they get counterspelled, there are going to be a lot of tables where that's going to be a huge pain point and just never occur because of it. There will be other tables where they'll be like, yep, this is what we signed up for. We are here to play the gritty, you're trying to kill us kind of game. But there are all going to be tables where you're going to say, you're good. We had the means to save that character, and you just said no. You just said no, that character's dying right now. And that's frustrating a lot of the time. And that leads this to be a controversial and difficult to use spell as a DM, especially.
You know, I thought of a good use for it. A deity that keeps counterspelling communes.
If you couldn't tell, we just talked about commune YouTube, and Bob is still seething thinking about it. Yeah, I guess. So counterspell is undoubtedly a powerful spell, and it's definitely going to be something that a lot of people are going to want to have because it is one of few ways to interact with powerful things. It gets more powerful by the fact that most people don't play it rules as written, to my understanding. If it is rules as written, please YouTube comments, let me know that I'm wrong. But should it be the case that you don't know the spell that is being cast before you counterspell it, this spell is substantially more powerful in the vast majority of ways people use it, and it will be used to shut things down like teleports. It will be used to shut things down like power word kills. It will be used to shut down spells that are way higher level than even the counterspell itself, because oftentimes you're taking really high ability check modifiers to the checks that you want to use with counterspell, right? Higher spell save DCs, if you're getting plus 9s and 10s, still mean you can like roll out a 3rd level spell slot and reasonably have an opportunity to counter a 9th level spell. It's just the nature of how weird the scaling is off of the spell rank and how it is an all-purpose shutdown tool for powerful things.
Now, you talked already about how it compares against like muting and grappling and all that, but there's There's other things that sound similar, but I don't think they're really compared, like Dispel Magic.
Dispel Magic is
Or,
retroactive, and this is
Yeah.
less. This is still retroactive, but it is instantaneous. Whereas Dispel Magic,
Yeah.
the thing's going to happen for a bit. I think they are somewhat comparable because Dispel Magic often is going to hit things more than just spells, which is weird to say, but again, it's kind of one of those rule of cool. If it's a magical effect, Dispel Magic kind of can handle it. Dispel Magic is a better out of combat tool, I think, than in combat, but there will be moments in combat where you're going to be like, all right, we need to take this. We're taking the bark skin off of that is valuable. Remove its bark skin, right? Getting something out, like if something is melting into stone while it's causing a bunch of havoc above board with something else, being able to stop it from melting into stone, pull it out of the earth, and then beat the shit out of it. That's something that Dispel Magic does do. It interacts in somewhat a similar way to Counterspell. Whereas Counterspell would have prevented it from happening at all, you're sort of preventing it. You're removing its effectiveness further down the road. You're saying you're done with that. It's not happening anymore. So it delays a lot of protective things most of the time. Whereas Counterspell is often going to be deterring proactive, like offensive things.
Now, I may be wrong. I don't think this is a spell in 5th edition, but it was in previous editions. Reflect is not in 5th edition, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, then we don't have to talk about that.
Cool.
That
It
one
sounds
would be
neat. I'm assuming it
comparable,
like returns spells back to the center.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds neat. I think so. I think Counterspell doesn't belong in. When I say Counterspell doesn't belong in the game, it's kind of iconic. But I think that there's a more gritty, more number crunchy, more everyone is a spellcaster interacting on this axis game that isn't Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, where Counterspell would be fine. If Counterspell were in a system where everyone is expected to cast spells and you want to play the little tactical board game that is managing 60-foot ranges, managing, how to control varying people's ability to cast magic in the first place and mitigate it in a bunch of different ways, that I think is where the spell kind of belongs. I don't think most tables are going to be playing that way. If you are playing that way, I think you kind of have to make the whole game shift to do something it's not really built to do. And a lot of classes are going to be feeling basically useless. Outside of that, still, though, it definitely is a powerful option that you're going to want to have. Outside of the moments where I think it belongs, I think that Counterspell, despite its frustrations that it will often bring up, is going to be a decent defensive tool on a suite of characters, even if it's not coming up in most encounters.
All right, yeah, I think I agree with most of what you just said. It's yeah, as long as both sides are using it or not using it, then it's fine. You got a Sam score?
I think this is going to be one of my more controversial takes, but I think this is a 3 out of 5 spell, and that it will be good in a few very specific encounters. And there are going to be a lot of monsters that really don't give a shit that you have Counterspell, and a lot of big bads that don't care whatsoever that you have it. But there are going to be other important monsters that do have it, and it'll, like, depending on your game, this can be a 5 out of 5. It can be a 1 out of 5, and it's just going to depend on your table.
Is the 3 based on it's a situational 2 or 4?
Yeah, it's a situational spell where some tables will absolutely feel like they need it, and the DM will prepare around it. And there will be other tables where the DM has never considered it once, and it has not mattered once, or it has mattered like 2 or 3 times tops.
Yeah.
And in those instances, you just prepare a spell that does nothing.
All right, cool. That was Counterspell. That was a fun talk.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam, for joining us, and thank you everyone else for also joining us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description where you'll find my Caverns Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, our full review of the spell, and other fun things.